morning, everyone. I want to start with a story about this woman in the middle of the photo. Her name is Vina Devi. Vina was 17 when her uncle arranged for her to be married off to a man from a village 2 hours away from where Vina's home was in the state of Bihar in India. She had never met him. When Vina arrived in her husband's home, she was told that she needed to rise each morning before 4:30 a.m. to prepare a meal for the 7 members of her husband's extended family that were sharing the small house with her. She noticed that every day, the whole household would go out to work before dawn and wouldn't return till very late in the evening. Even the 2 children, aged 10 and 14, her husband's little brother and sister, would go out to work. And she learned that they were working in a brick kiln. Vina's mother-in-law told her that the family had been working there for years. They were in debt to the brick kiln owner, who was forcing the whole family to work to pay off the debt. This is incredibly grueling work, with adults spending up to 14 hours a day mixing the mud and the soil to make the bricks and then carrying them to the kiln. And with the children working alongside the adults for up to 9 hours a day. Vina could see that the family was struggling to feed itself, and her husband was taking further loans from the kiln owner at extortionate interest rates just to be able to buy food. She also learned that the other families in the village were in the same situation. Many of them had inherited their debts from their parents and were stuck in an endless cycle of debt bondage that had been going on for generations. Effectively, the whole village was in slavery. Vina couldn't see any way the situation was going to change, and she became depressed. Each time I've visited India, I've met someone like Vina who has told a similar story. The reality is her story isn't unusual. It's being repeated right now in different forms for tens of millions of men, women, and children, not just in India, but across the globe. We live in a world where deeply entrenched systems push whole sections of our societies, the most vulnerable, into different forms of extreme exploitation, or what we rightfully call modern slavery. And we know what these systems are: poverty, racism and discrimination, weak rule of law. They're enormous issues, and it can seem beyond our reach to try to influence them. But at the Freedom Fund, we believe we have to try to tackle these root causes of slavery if we're going to make a lasting change. And since 2014, we've been trialing an approach that has done exactly this. And several recent evaluations have shown extremely promising results, including dramatic reductions in the number of people in slavery where we are working. And so we're very excited to be here to share some of what we've learned with all of you. First, a bit of background. The Freedom Fund is currently running 8 programs to combat modern slavery in 5 high-prevalence countries: India, Nepal, Thailand, Myanmar, and Ethiopia. Our model is to go out and find the best local civil society organizations, nonprofits, grassroots community groups, and bring them together to collectively tackle slavery in a particular geography. We have 2 programs in India that have been extensively evaluated over the past 4 years. One, targeting communities in bonded labor in the states of Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, like Vina's, and the second in the state of Tamil Nadu, where many adolescent girls are forced to work in cotton spinning mills that feed the global clothing industry. In these 2 program areas, which cover approximately 1,100 villages, Research by the Institute of Development Studies in the UK found nearly 80% reductions in the number of people being illegally forced to work over just a few years. To put that into perspective, that translates into roughly 125,000 fewer people in slavery across the two programs. It's 125,000 women, men, and children now living in freedom. And these findings add to a growing body of evidence, which we've summarized in the report that we've published today, including studies by Harvard University and the UK government that have found transformative change in these communities as a result of our programs and the coordinated work of our partner NGOs on the ground. NGOs that work tirelessly, often at great risk to themselves on the front lines of this fight. And I'm thrilled that we have one of these NGOs here today to join our panel discussion. What is behind this collective success? First and foremost is a focus on challenging and rebalancing power. After all, at its heart, that is what modern slavery is about. The power of one individual over another, or the imbalance in power between whole communities and those that oppress them. For Vina, her caste is seen as among the lowest of the low. They're easily evicted from their land. If their children are enrolled in primary schools, they often drop out because they are bullied. In some communities, the employer can literally drag the children out of school at any time if there is work. They're denied access to basic services such as healthcare that are supposed to be available to all citizens. They can be physically and sexually abused with impunity. Power imbalances always exist for groups that are at high risk of being exploited, whether it's minorities, migrant workers, or women and girls. But these results show that they can be challenged. So how can we do this? Our programs follow three basic principles. First, concentrate resources. For communities to really disrupt the status quo, they need many different forms of support. They need information about their rights under the law, and they need practical tools to be able to make a change in their lives. Community organizing techniques, alternative income sources, access to government entitlements that can provide a safety net. But if resources are spread too thinly across too large an area, it is impossible to provide the level of support that is needed. So we fund NGOs to work intensively in a relatively small geographic area to ensure all of these different pieces are in place. Second, organize for collective action. It's one thing to be making a change at the village level, or even across several hundred villages. But the really dramatic change happens when communities and civil society organizations come together as part of a social movement to influence government and business. In every Freedom Fund program, we work to convene diverse coalitions of partners to work together to try to change some of these bigger systems at play, to push for better legislation and stronger enforcement of the law, to shift attitudes, and ultimately to fight for equal rights. And finally, commit to the long term. This goes without saying, but entrenched systems don't change overnight. And yet in practice, it is rare to find programs that are set up for the long term. And that means they're less likely to succeed. So we aim for our programs to run for a minimum of 5 to 8 years. You simply cannot build the foundations for collective action with anything less. I'm now going to hand over to Michelle, who's going to tell us how the program helped Vina to change her family situation.
Thanks, Dan. Good morning, everyone. My name is Michelle Mendonca, and I'm the program manager for Bihar and Uttar Pradesh. I'm going to tell you more about Vina and her incredible work with one of our key NGO partners in Bihar, an NGO called Nitesh. About a year after Vina's marriage, she joined a community group facilitated by Nitesh. This group, comprising 37 women, would meet every month to discuss the issues that kept their families in bondage. It was here that Veena first heard the term bonded labor. She learned that she had rights just like everyone else. The first transformation for Veena and the other women was psychological, realizing that just because generations had lived this way, they didn't have to share the same fate. It may be hard to believe, but many of these women had never tried to challenge the way that things were. Next, the group began collectively to explore the kinds of actions that they could take. With Nirdesh's support, they started to engage with the brick kiln owner. It wasn't easy. After a tense period of 6 months, during which the villagers had to withdraw their labor, and Veena, the families, and even Nirdesh faced threats and intimidation, they finally got the brick kiln owner to agree to release them, with the understanding that he would hire some of them back at fair wages. 37 women and their families were now free from the system of bonded labor that had oppressed them. Nirdesh had been organizing skills training for the women in the evenings, and many of them knew how to tailor and make bangles. Now that they were free to work outside the brick kiln, they started to earn an independent income. Nirdesh also opened up a small transitional school in the village, and Veena was appointed teacher. She became a leader in her community. She started to urge families to send their children to school. With Nirdesh's support, she started to connect her co-villagers to government benefits like food, educational scholarships, and basic documents. She didn't stop there. Veena and the other women began mobilizing families in the adjacent communities to follow their lead and escape the cycle of bonded labor. Their example created a ripple effect, and even as we speak, more and more families are exiting the system. Veena is one person, one example, but I'm proud to say that just in that small part of Bihar, where we and our partners work, there are many more like her. It's a growing movement of optimism and change. In neighboring Uttar Pradesh, one of our partners, MSMVS, has supported 300 survivors of bonded labor to collectively engage with the authorities. Very recently, they secured an order from India's highest human rights body, requiring the government to prioritize bonded labor rehabilitation. This is no mean achievement. Just as survivors are gaining confidence, our network of NGO partners is pressing government to take stronger action on bonded labor issues. They've had some major successes. They've had court orders requiring requiring government to take action against employers who pay less than the minimum wage. They've also been able to secure policies that strengthen child protection mechanisms. What this reinforces is that collective action is key to tackling slavery at the scale and intensity that the problem demands. We are finally seeing this happen today in Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, and it's thanks to people like Veena and to groups like Nirdesh. I'll leave you now with a message from Veena.
अबे कितनो रहिला फूटी तो घुंसारी थोड़े ना फोड़ दी अभी संभव नहीं थे संभव हो सकी अगर फ्रीडम फंड पूरा बिहार में काम करी और ओकरा साथे साथे फ्रीडम फंड के पूरा सदस्य लोग काम करी तो हो सकेला लेकिन समय लगी 2-3 साल में समय लगी.
She's very ambitious. But her message inspires us, and of course, we all know here that we're a long way from ending modern slavery. We've talked today about the issue of bonded labor in India. Of course, there are many different forms of modern slavery in many different countries, but we believe that the fundamentals of this approach, concentrating resources, organizing for that bottom-up collective action, and committing to the long term are critical ingredients in helping us change the systems that allow modern slavery to persist. None of this is easy, but as we've heard today, working together, supporting courageous individuals and NGOs, we can make progress. We are making progress in this fight. Thank you.